that is the point, is that you bring folks together, you wrestle with big things, and then you discern together where is it that you are called to take action.
Welcome, friends, to this special edition of Tiny Pulpit Talks. We are so glad you are with us. I'm Reverend TJ FitzGerald, your Minister of Community Care and Engagement. Like us, comment, ask us questions. We want to hear from you here. Also, go ahead and review us on any podcast distributors that you are using. Just a little bit of notes at the beginning. And we are so grateful to have with us our special guest who's going to introduce herself right now.
Great. Thank you, TJ.
You're welcome.
Good to be with you. My name is the Reverend Angela Tyler Williams. My pronouns are she and her, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the co-executive director for movement building at Sacred, which is the Spiritual Alliance of Communities for Reproductive Dignity.
Sacred. Yes. We talk about Sacred a lot at this church.
Yes, y'all are some good champions of ours, and we are very grateful for that.
Tell us a little bit more about what Sacred is for people that don't know.
Yeah, so Sacred is a national alliance of congregations, academics, faith leaders, movement partners, everyone working together to advance reproductive justice. And we do that work in a variety of ways. We have the Sacred Congregations Designation Program, which I'm excited to celebrate y'all as our fourth Sacred Congregation this coming Sunday.
All right.
So that's the designation program. We also have a national gathering that happens every 2 years. And the last time I got to see you was when we were together in New Orleans back in May. And then we also do media advocacy work. So recognizing that the dominant narrative that's out there in the media does not actually represent people of faith and moral conscience like us and like the folks at First Unitarian Church of Dallas. And so what can we do to shift that narrative and get more of our voices and more of our values into those public spaces? And lastly, we do some work on direct service. And so working with our partners across the country, including this congregation, to make sure that folks, wherever they are, whether they're in a low access state or a high access state, can access the reproductive health care and abortions that they need to.
That's an enormous amount that you're doing.
You're right. I'm tired.
Tell me about your team. Who's doing this?
So we have a small but mighty team of 3 full-time staff. It's myself and my co-director, Reverend Letitia James, and then Reverend Lindsay Godwin, who's our program operations coordinator. And then we're supported by our lead trainer, Reverend Cantina Washington Leapart, and our scholar in residence, Dr. Elizabeth Fries, who helps us develop our curriculum and make some new versions of that are particularly to some faith traditions. And then we are supported by an awesome board that is made of a group of people that made Sacred happen, going on almost 5 years ago now.
Wow.
It's wild. Reverend Dr. Daniel Cantor here was one of our sort of founding board members who was on those calls in early 2020 when we were like, what is this gonna be? How are we gonna do it? And so we're really grateful for the collective that comes together that makes this work. We get all of this done with 3 paid full-time staff.
That is enormous.
It is.
Yeah. What led you to this work?
Oh my goodness.
I know that's a big question.
It's
do
a
you
big question.
Do you want me to take it in pieces, or do you have a?
No, we can do the
All
whole
right.
thing. So I am a Presbyterian pastor. I was ordained in 2020 and got into the work through just being in love with the church and the church being a real home for me. And I had
some of my best friends are Presbyterian, by the way.
We're a pretty great group, if I have to say so myself. And so I was formed by the church and got to learn a lot of different things about a lot of different issues. I started, after I graduated from college, I spent a year in the Philippines in a place that's really on the front lines of climate change. And lived in a place that was impacted by Typhoon Yolanda, which in 2013 was the largest storm to ever make landfall. While I was there, I learned about people in the Philippines and churches and like really faithful folks who put their faith into practice in the streets and protested against martial law and had real consequences because of that. And that led me to going to Washington, D.C. to learn how to do community organizing in faith communities. In particular, I focused on working with folks experiencing homelessness. Okay. And I met lots of individuals, and particularly women, who are living in Washington, D.C. and like don't have regular access to bathrooms. And so every month they're like, okay, my period is here. What am I going to do? Where am I going to find supplies? Is this business going to let me in? As well as the different impacts of sexual assault that they experience, whether it's on the streets or in shelters. And it opened my eyes to the real vulnerabilities there. And I went to seminary and was like, okay, I'm going to be a pastor in the church, but also in the world. What does that look like? And I was here in Texas. I was in Austin the fall of 2016.
Ah.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I was serving a church in Portland in fall of 2016, so.
Yeah, my first semester was fall 2016.
Where'd you go to seminary?
Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so immigration became a really big issue for us.
To say the very least.
And getting out on the streets and protesting against the 45th administration, separating children and families. I came out in seminary, and like there's a particular pipeline of being a faithful leader, Christian leader, and you come out and you immediately start organizing people of faith for more LGBTQ inclusion. I fit right into that.
Yeah.
And as I was ending seminary, I did an internship with the Texas Freedom Network that was doing some of that organization, and then I learned about the Reproductive Justice Framework. And if you're not familiar with it, it is a framework developed by 12 Black women in 1994. We're celebrating 30 years this summer. And it has 4 tenets: the human right to raise a child, the human right not to have a child, and the human right to raise the children we do have in safe and sustainable communities, and then the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy. And that framework helped me to situate all of these other particular experiences and all of these other issue areas into a broader theological human rights framework, and to say, oh, here's a place and a space, a movement that I don't have to cut off a part of myself. I can bring my faith. I can bring my queerness. I can bring my commitment to anti-racism. I can bring what I learned and developed was a very positive pro-abortion stance, and I don't have to sacrifice any of that. And so once I got that taste of what was possible, as I was leaving seminary and figuring out where I was going to be and what work was going to be mine in the world, that became a lens to see things through. And I was like, well, I don't want to go to a place where I can only bring this part into the door, or I'm going to have to leave that piece out there. And that's how I ended up here. And I've tried to find other things to do. And in my tradition, we talk about how God doesn't let you run away from the call. God will pull you back in and say, no, this is yours. I've got this for you to do right here, right now.
God has work for us to do.
Yes, and it has grown into sacred.
Yeah, that's beautiful. The thing I was really feeling in that is this whole self. Bringing whole self and the sanctity of that.
Yes.
The gift of that. Can you say more about have you grown into that? Have you shared that wisdom with other people? I'm feeling some of the power from naming that. Can you talk about some of your experiences in your ministry of realizing your whole self is coming to this work?
Yeah. Well, I think that is part of that sort of bridge placement for me as a person and Sacred as an organization. So for lots of queer folks who are in Christian spaces, you can say, I'm too queer for this church space, and I'm too Christian for this queer space.
So I'll just be the music director. No, I'm sorry.
Right. How many exist out there? And they make beautiful music, and we love them for their gifts. And some of them are called to be ordained leaders too.
Right. I digress.
But it's that liminality and being in that liminal space where there's some beauty in the ambiguity of saying, no, I am going to hold all of this and I'm not going to sacrifice myself. I'll say one of my deep teachers of that is Audre Lorde.
Oh, yeah.
And she says we are not single issue voters because we do not live single issue lives. Mm-hmm. And that is a guiding principle for me as a person, I think for reproductive justice as a movement, and for all of the work that we do, is that we can't separate ourselves off. And I learned so much from other Black feminists who unapologetically take up space and make space for themselves. I'm also reminded of like Shirley Chisholm, and if there's not a place for you at the table, bring your own chair and you are going to be there.
It's, I was just talking about, though she doesn't identify always as a theologian, I believe she's a theologian, Angela Davis, of just saying, I am going to be angry.
Yes.
I'm going to go to court with the way I want to look, and I'm going to win, by the way. And that, I think, I went to this restaurant once where they had custom-made fabric on the banquettes, and one of the images they chose, it was owned by a feminist professor. It was a vegan restaurant, and so she had Angela Davis as like one of the images on the thing. And I mean, there was just something so powerful about realizing the influence that you can have in that way. But, yeah.
That reminds me of a lesbian bar in Washington, D.C. called A League of Her Own. And on the wall in the basement is just this mosaic of queer women and non-binary and transgressive people. And it's got everyone, they're not all queer. It's got like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it's got Ellen DeGeneres, and it has the Reverend Dr. Lawyer Polly Murray there, a saint in some of our hearts.
Yeah. And
to see that queerness makes a way for all of that too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We were talking a little bit before this about prayer and about song and about what that looks like. And, lately I've been seeing Reverend Dr. Warnock's, comment about a vote as a prayer, as a kind of prayer. And, when you were talking about making space for a person who's having their period, finding out this dignity, like, to me, I think there's a prayerfulness and to the actions that we take for holding people's dignity. And that's just especially folks who are just on the margins, who have been marginalized, to make space for that. And I mean, to me, the kind of work you're doing in this wholeness feels prayerful to me. I mean, do you feel that in your...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. When you talk about holding space, making space, and that is at the heart of sacred and the sacred congregations designation, is that we are working with congregations to create and hold space where people can bring their faith story and their reproductive story free from shame, judgment, and stigma. And that includes abortion stories. That includes birth stories. That includes fertility and infertility stories. That includes miscarriages. That also includes where do I find my menstrual products. That includes menopause stories. That includes parenting stories, parenting children in impossible circumstances and situations. It includes all of that.
And this, I want to say something about your curriculum, that we have had partners who are co-parenting children in the sacred class, and watching them learn from each other about things they might not have even talked about in their own home.
Right.
Yet in this space, so it's also getting to intimacy and that deeper connection. Yes. We've had physicians who are learning medicine in your sacred curriculum. I just want to say that out loud. And who are like, this is not how we were taught. Right. And this is not just like our congregation, it's other things I've heard. The people who are drawn to doing this work, both the people that teach it at this this institution and the people who come into it, this is just a pitch for other people watching. If you want to do leadership development,
Right.
teach sacred.
Yes.
Because we have had people come out of the sacred class how we've realized are leaders, because it requires deep thinking. It involves attaching my needs to what I want to see done in the world. It's a kind of spiritual action that happens, and then we've watched people come out of sacred and really, really contribute to the life of this congregation. I don't know if anyone's given you that feedback, or like we have just seen it in action. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And that is the goal of the curriculum, is to be a tool for a community to wrestle with these things together. And we have no idea what will come of it. Right. So I think you've mentioned this to me before, like you had someone come out of this and join like an anniversary planning team, or like join the stewardship committee. Right. Yeah. And that is the point, is that you bring folks together, you wrestle with big things, and then you discern together, where is it that you are called to take action? And what is your particular community's context? What are the needs here? And this congregation has a long history of doing exactly that, whether it is putting together in the middle of, or in response to SB 8 going into effect back in 2021 that banned abortion up at 6 weeks in the state of Texas, to developing almost on the fly a travel program to get folks. We have people here in Dallas, we have the relationships, and we know that there's a clinic in Albuquerque that can provide services to these folks. And what resources do we have to meet the needs of our community? And how that has developed into the Truth Pregnancy Resource Center, like amazing. I was telling someone else in movement at a conference last week. I was like, yeah, this church in Dallas is a part of like starting this organization. And they were like, that exists in Texas? And I was like, yes, we cannot count out Texas or red states anywhere.
Not only does it exist, it is thriving, and Deneen and Adrel are just, I mean, the staff there are true professionals. I mean, it's really, I can't believe it's only been up for 4 months, and it's already, I mean, they've done tremendous work.
Right, and so it's listening there, but it's also like, that's what's happening here in your community. We've got another congregation in Lubbock that is a big college town. Yep. And so one of the ways that they've lived into it is having Plan B and like emergency contraception packets available on site. So if anyone needs to show up and needs any resources, they just come into the building, they get what they need, and they're able to go out and go on with their lives.
We have Plan B here, and we've met the most interesting people for the most, actually a wider range of reasons than you might think. Yeah. But I can't get into all the detail, but that alone is such a, I mean, and also, you know, we have Narcan, we have, you know, there's different things that we are keeping to be, you know, safe and supporting our community, and the kinds of relationships you can build just by taking, in a sense, what's a passive action, just letting people know about it, builds relationship, builds a future for your congregation in this work.
Yes. So. And including Narcan in that, like, that is also a reproductive justice issue. Yeah. That is creating space for more life. That is creating space for people to live and have their families and their futures in safe and sustainable communities. It all still falls under that big, great intersectional framework.
Yeah, I know we could go on. I want to go on.
We could.
I do want to ask a question at the end that I always ask folks who are ministers, but I just want to hold up once more. We can't say it enough. The future that the Reproductive Justice Framework has started to build already and can build in the future, and just to give the genesis, the authorship, the motherhood and the parenthood of that movement to the Black women who created it.
Yes.
And to just make that clear that when we're saying reproductive, this is the former trademark lawyer in me. When we say reproductive justice, we are talking about a movement started by a specific group of people.
And I will bring attention to my shirt, which is actually, it is from Sister Song, the Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. They had their conference in August that was right around that 30th anniversary time. But these are the names of the 12 Black women who were in that room in Chicago in 1994. And I love that I now have this, and there's been conversation within the movement of like, we say that, but like no one knows who they are. And so
then
there
we
is
tell people
so
who
much
they are.
more, and we know the names, and we
Yeah.
can tell their story, and we can share that and continue to build our own story as
Yeah.
we build a future towards more liberation and more justice.
And I think that is also, I know we said we're going to stop, but the dominant narrative of whiteness
Yes.
wants to say things like, oh, it's just too hard. Or, oh, well, no, it's really kind of everyone's. No. You're wearing a shirt with the authors on
Right.
it. So I just want to say that, like, if that's that impulse, like, no, reproductive justice is a concrete initiative, spiritual framework through which we can view things. And that is a spiritual discipline.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the thing I want to ask ministers is, what's your go-to hymn in times of trouble?
Ooh, I love this question so much. Well, what just came to me, I was pausing as I was letting the tune go in my head, is How Great Thou Art.
Have you heard the Carrie Underwood version?
I don't know, not recently.
Look, I mean, Carrie, I love, there's a lot of vocalists I love. But she does a live version you can watch on YouTube that is quite something. It is inspired.
I love that.
Yes.
I love that.
Well,
That's
how
great.
great thou art.
How great thou art.
For being with us. Angela, we are so glad that you're here. I know, wait, you have something kicking off on Tuesday.
I do.
Pitch it.
I do.
Pitch it to the people.
So if you got a taste of this conversation and you want to learn more, we have got a webinar series coming out this fall for you. It is called Woven Together, Religion and Reproductive Justice. And so there are 6 sessions from September to December happening Tuesdays, 7 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 to 7:30 p.m. Central Time, that will talk about white Christian nationalism. We'll talk about the Bible and abortion. We'll talk about abortion stigma and how to bust that for faith leaders. And we will talk about the ways that reproductive justice and anti-sexual violence movements can learn from each other and be intertwined together. I hope that you can join us. Go to sacreddignity.org to find more information and make sure you are registered.
And while you're there, give them money. Sorry, couldn't help
That
myself.
too. That too. We will always take the funds. We offer, this series is free to access because we recognize folks are coming from a lot of different economic circumstances, but we're recommending a donation of $25 per session, $150 total, but you do not have to pay to access that. But
Great.
There are ways that we can receive any love offerings that come our way.
Great. We're so glad you're here. This was so wonderful. I know we went longer than we normally do, but I don't know. I felt the spirit moving. So everyone, like this, enjoy it. Go search out sacreddignity.org and learn more about their work, the important work that they're doing in the world. You can register for our own sacred class.
Yes.
We're kicking it off October 7th. It's actually filling up pretty fast. These days, we post it, and it's full.
Amazing. I love
So,
that.
but go ahead and sign up. And like us, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat here and review us on our podcast, ways of doing that. And we're just so glad that you're with us again for this exciting episode. Yeah. So tune in again to Tiny Pulpit Talks, and we will see you on Sunday. Bye, y'all.